Let me talk about script error checking. Typically, a script gets a URL from an href on the current page. So to get to the next page, you click on a link on the current page. Now, a script is a series of pages that are strung together. So what if there's an error on the first page or the second page? Typically, you're stuck. You can't go on. If you can't get past the current page, then there's no reason to try to get to the next page. So today I'm going to talk about rational performance testers built-in error handling. So here we're looking at a test script that implements Plan Spy WebSphere, which is a common app that we use for testing. And you can see that there's one page after the other, after the other, after the other. And if you had to add error checks, if statements around every one of these, the script would be unreadable. It would take a lot of time to script. So to handle that in a more graceful manner, RPT adds built-in error checking and exiting on certain conditions. And it does that at many different levels. And it does that to give you maximum flexibility, but frankly, it's a bit of overkill. And so I'm going to show you all the places where you can do error checking, but I'm going to suggest that you do it at the schedule level. So looking at a script, you go to the Advanced tab, error handling option here, and you can expand that, and you can see all the options. You can automatically handle errors on page title verifications, problems, response code verifications, response size verifications, content verification, connection failures, authentication failures, etc., etc. I'm not going to read them all. You can do this at the script level, but for ease of implementation, I would recommend doing it at the schedule level. So looking at a schedule, also on the Advanced tab, you can do it. There's error handling options at the user group level or at the loop level. And what I have found works best is to do it at the loop level. It's a nice high level to do it at, and typical thing is if you hit an error, you want to bail out of what you're doing and continue at the next iteration of the loop. So to do that, you go back to the General tab. The easiest way to do that is to name the loop. So I'm going to call this loop 1. Call it whatever you want to. And then I will go to the error checking options. And let's just take one of these, content verification. That's a good one. So if it fails the content checks, in other words, the page doesn't have the content that you expect, you have a number of options. You can continue and ignore it. You can exit a transaction, which we're not generally using. You can exit loop. You can continue to the next iteration of the loop. You can exit the test entirely. You can exit the way too many options. So what works best is to continue the next iteration of the loop and use the name of the loop. So basically it says if you hit a problem any place in this loop, stop what you're doing and go back to the loop that's named loop 1. And so any error during add card, any content verification point failure during add card processing will abort the next transactions and go back to the top of the loop and start over again. And that is just the simplest way to do it. Let me go quickly through the verifications that I typically use, because I don't use all of them. Response code failure is a good one to bail out on, because if you get a bad response code, then you probably got a big problem. Connection failures, if you can't connect to the server, that's a good reason to continue to the next iteration of the loop. Authentication failure, other things fail. In my case, if authentication fails, so we'll catch it elsewhere. Data pool, end the data pool reach, we will loop and go to the top of the data pool. Reference extraction failure is usually a pretty serious error, because if we can't get the href off the page, we can't go to the next page. So we'll bail out on that. Substitution failure is the same thing. If you can't substitute, then it's not going to go to the right page. So that's a bailout case. Server timeout's a bailout case. Custom verification point failure, or I don't have any custom verification points I typically use, or custom code alert, or custom code exception. That's not a bad one to exit on. Although I think that with custom code exceptions, it typically causes a V user to fail. So I'm not sure there's real good recovery from that. So anyway, those are the sets of verification points that I typically use. I set it at the schedule level. I set it at the loop level of the schedule, and I name the loop. It's just the simplest way to handle it. There's a lot of choices. You could put it in this test case script. You could put it at the group level. Simplest, most reliable way is to put it at the loop level in the schedule. One thing to be concerned about with exit on error is that if you hit an error, a system-wide error that's transient, and all users fail at the same time, and they all iterate to the start of the script at the same time, you might get a rush of users hitting the same page at the same time, and that can cause problems. And so the way you get around that is for the very first line of a script, you put a delay, a think time, so that a randomized think time, so that if all users fail at once, they don't all recycle to the top of the script at the very same instance. That will spread it out a little bit. It's worth mentioning that when you put these exit on error conditions in the schedule or in the script, the bar graphs, the summary bar graphs that shows your error rates when you're running a test, they don't always reflect these errors correctly. So watch out for that when you're using exit on error and those bar graphs show you 100% success rate. You really do have to look at the test log to make sure that the pages that you expect to be executing are executing. I've had a case where the bar graphs show 100% success, but what you see is that some reference or something failed on a page, the first page out of 10. It executed the first page out of 10, did not execute the other 9, so they didn't fail. And so it shows 100% success rate when really it's 100% failure rate. Hopefully that'll be fixed at some point or improved upon at some point, but if you're using exit on error, watch out for that. In this talk I covered RPT's error handling logic, and I mentioned that you can do it at the script level or you can do it at the schedule level. But the simplest way to do it is to do it at the schedule level, at the loop level, and just name the loop and iterate to the top of the loop on the errors that you hit. I also mentioned to watch out for what we call the thundering herd effect after an error, system-wide error. All users hit a problem and they all iterate to the top of the script, to the first line of the script, and they all hit that first line of the script at the same time. And that is not really how it works in the real world. In the real world, users will determine that they have an error at different times, and they'll hit enter at different times, and the way to handle that is to put a delay, a think time, before the first request, and that will spread out the thundering herd all hitting the enter at the same time on that first request. And that's a randomized think time. And I also mentioned that if you are using exit on error, you need to be careful not to trust the bar graphs, the summary bar graphs that show 100% success, because sometimes the error is not the type of error that shows up in those bar graphs, and it causes it to bail out. And those bar graphs can show 100% success when in fact most of the requests are not executing.